Let me start with this. If you've ever looked in the mirror and thought, why am I never enough? Stay with me. Because what I'm about to say might sting, but it might also change your life. You don't struggle with self-worth because you're broken. You struggle because you were taught to earn your value instead of own it. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned this quiet, dangerous lessons. You are lovable when you perform. You are worthy when you achieve. You belong when you don't mess up. And so we start hustling for approval, hustling for validation, hustling for the right body, the right success, the right words, hoping that one day someone will look at us and say, now you're enough. But here's the truth we don't want to face. Self-worth that depends on external approval is always fragile. Because the moment the applause stops, the moment you fail, the moment someone criticizes you, it collapses. And when it collapses, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel ashamed, you feel small, you feel like something is wrong with you. And that's the real reason this hurts so deeply. Self-worth issues aren't about confidence, they're about shame, they're about the belief that if people really saw you, your fears, your mistakes, your imperfections, they would walk away. So you armor up, you overachieve, you people please, you silence your needs. And on the outside, you look strong. But inside, you're exhausted because you're trying to prove something that was never supposed to be proven in the first place. Your worth was never meant to be negotiated. Here's what we rarely admit out loud. The voice that questions your worth didn't start with you. It was handed to you. Passed down quietly through expectations, comparisons, and conditional love. Maybe it sounded like praise, but only when you did well. Maybe it sounded like criticism when you failed. Either way, the message was cleared. Love has rules. So you learn to scan the room, to read faces, to measure yourself against others. And every time you came up short, you didn't think, I made a mistake. You thought, I am the mistake. That distinction changes everything. Because when failure becomes identity, shame takes root. Shame doesn't shout, it whispers. It says, don't try, you'll fail. It says, don't speak, you'll sound stupid. It says, don't rest, you haven't earned it. And the cruelest part, shame convinces you that isolation will keep you safe. So you hide the parts of yourself that feel messy, needy, or afraid. But hiding has a cost. When you hide, you don't just hide the pain, you hide your joy, your creativity, your softness. You start living half a life, showing only the acceptable pieces, wondering why you still feel empty even when you succeed. Here's the hard truth, self. Worth can't survive in secrecy. The more you hide who you are, the more power shame has over you. And shame feeds on silence like oxygen. The struggle with self-worth isn't about not knowing your value. Deep down, you sense it. The struggle is about being terrified to believe you're worthy without proving it. And that fear, that's where the real work begins. Let me tell you something uncomfortable, but freeing self-worth does not grow through self-criticism. It grows through self-compassion. And yet, most of us were taught the opposite, that being hard on yourself will make you better, stronger, more successful. So when you mess up, you don't lean in with kindness. You punish yourself, thinking shame will keep you in line. But shame never makes us change for the better. It makes us hide. It makes us defensive. It makes us numb. If beating yourself up actually worked, you would already feel whole by now. But you don't. Because cruelty, even when it's self-directed, erodes worth instead of building it. Here's what self-compassion really means, and it's not what people think. It's not letting yourself off the hook. It's not pretending everything is fine. It's having the courage to say, this hurts, I'm struggling, and I still deserve care. That sentence alone can dismantle years of shame. When you treat yourself with compassion, you interrupt the cycle. You stop confusing imperfection with unworthiness. You learn to separate behavior from identity. You can say, I failed without saying I am a failure. That separation is life-changing. And yes, this feels terrifying at first because compassion requires vulnerability. It asks you to stay present with pain instead of running from it. It asks you to acknowledge your humanity instead of performing strength. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop waging war against yourself is the moment you reclaim your power. Self-worth isn't built by becoming flawless. It's built by learning how to be gentle with yourself when you are not. That gentleness, it's not weakness. It's courage in its rawest form. Now let's talk about the armor you wear, the one you don't even realize you've been carrying, perfectionism. People think perfectionism is about high standards, but it's not. It's a shield, a desperate attempt to say, if I do everything right, no one can hurt me. And when your self-worth is shaky, that shield feels necessary. Perfectionism tells you that mistakes are dangerous, that vulnerability is risky, that being seen as you are could cost you love. So you over-prepare, you overthink, you replay conversations in your head at 3 a.m., wondering if you said too much or not enough. You chase flawlessness, not because you want excellence, but because you're afraid of rejection. But here's the truth. Perfectionism doesn't want you to know it. It doesn't protect you from shame. It creates it. Because the bar is never reachable. There is always someone doing more, being better, looking stronger, and every time you fall short of the impossible standard, your worth takes another hit. Perfectionism is not self-improvement. It's self-distrust. It's the belief that who you are right now is not safe to be seen, and the cost is heavy. You delay joy until everything is perfect. You delay rest until you've earned it. You delay self-acceptance until some future version of you arrives. But that future keeps moving, and you stay stuck, tired, anxious, and quietly ashamed. Let me say this clearly. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love and belonging. You never did. Worthiness is not a reward you receive at the finish line. It's the starting point. The moment you loosen the armor, you give yourself permission to breathe. Here's where things get even more honest. Self-worth struggles are often rooted in disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself. When you've spent years shaping who you are to be acceptable, you lose touch with what you actually feel, want, and need, and that loss is quiet, but devastating. You start saying yes when your body is screaming no. You ignore exhaustion and call it discipline. You dismiss your pain because someone else has it worse. And every time you abandon yourself like that, a small voice inside learns an awful lesson. My needs don't matter. Over time, this becomes normal. You become the reliable one, the strong one, the one who doesn't ask for much. People praise you for it. But what they don't see is the loneliness underneath, the ache of never feeling fully known, because you've never felt fully allowed to be honest. Self-worth cannot survive self-abandonment. You cannot build a sense of value while constantly overriding your own boundaries, emotions, and limits. That inner disconnection creates a hollow feeling, like you're present everywhere except inside your own life. And here's the painful irony. The more you disconnect from yourself to keep others comfortable, the less connected you actually feel to them. Because real connection requires authenticity, and authenticity requires you to honor what's true for you, even when it's inconvenient. Rebuilding self-worth begins with a radical, uncomfortable practice listening to yourself again, not judging, not fixing, just listening. Your feelings are not weaknesses. Your needs are not burdens. They are signals pointing you back home to yourself. The moment you stop abandoning yourself, something shifts. You begin to trust yourself, and trust is the foundation of worth. Let's talk about comparison, the thief that quietly dismantles yourself, worth piece by piece. We live in a world that constantly asks you to measure yourself against timelines, against achievements, against curated versions of other people's lives. And when you do that long enough, you start believing you're behind, lacking, or failing, even when you're not. Comparison is seductive because it promises clarity. It says, if I can just figure out where I rank, I'll know if I'm okay. But the truth is, comparison doesn't bring certainty. It brings anxiety because there will always be someone ahead of you in some way, and your worth was never meant to be ranked. What comparison really does is turn uniqueness into a liability. Instead of asking, who am I, you start asking, how do I measure up And that question slowly erases your sense of self. You stop valuing your pace, your process, your story. You rush healing. You rush growth. You rush life. And here's the deeper wound: comparison fuels scarcity. It convinces you there's not enough success, love, or belonging to go around. So you compete instead of connect, you envy instead of admire, and you feel shame for wanting what others have, adding another layer to the pain. But worthiness does not come from being better than someone else. It comes from believing you are enough as you are. And enough doesn't mean average. It means whole. The moment you stop using other people as mirrors to judge as yourself, you create space to actually see yourself, your strengths, your tenderness, your resilience, your limits. Your journey is not late. You are not behind. You are becoming at your own pace. And that pace is not a flaw. It's part of your truth. Now let's name the fear sitting underneath all of this, the fear of being truly seen. Because if you're honest, part of you believes that if people saw the real you, the doubts, the wounds, the mess, they would pull away. So you curate yourself. You edit your emotions. You offer the version of you that feels safest. But here's what that costs you: belonging. Real belonging doesn't happen when you're accepted for who you pretend to be. It happens when you're accepted for who you actually are. And that requires courage most people never practice. Vulnerability is not oversharing. It's not dumping your pain on others. Vulnerability is telling the truth about what's happening inside you, even when your voice shakes. It's saying, I'm not okay, without rushing to make it sound pretty or strong. And yes, vulnerability comes with risk. Not everyone will respond with care. Some people won't have the capacity. Some will misunderstand. But here's the part we don't talk about enough: hiding guarantees disconnection. Vulnerability, at least, gives you a chance at connection. When you risk being seen, you give others permission to do the same. You create relationships built on honesty instead of performance. And in those moments, when someone meets you with empathy instead of judgment, your self-worth strengthens. Not because they approve of you, but because you dared to show up as yourself. Self-worth grows in spaces where you can be real, where your humanity is welcomed, not tolerated. And the bravest thing you can do is believe that who you are right now is worthy of being seen. That belief changes everything. Here's the shift that changes the entire conversation about self-worth. You don't build it by thinking differently. You build it by living differently. Insight alone doesn't heal shame. Action does. Small, courageous, everyday actions that tell your nervous system, I matter. Self-worth grows when your behavior aligns with your values, when you say no and don't explain yourself, when you rest without guilt, when you stop chasing people who only show up when it's convenient. These choices may look ordinary from the outside, but inside they are revolutionary. Because every time you honor a boundary, you send yourself a message that I am worth protecting. Every time you tell the truth instead of what's expected, you say, my voice matters. And every time you choose yourself without abandoning others, you rewrite the old story that love requires self-sacrifice. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Choosing yourself will disappoint some people, especially those who benefited from your silence, your overgiving, your self-doubt. And when that happens, the old shame will try to rush back in, whispering, see, you're selfish, you're too much. But let me be clear, discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you're breaking a pattern that was hurting you. Self-worth is not built in grand gestures. It's built in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when you keep a promise to yourself, when you pause instead of pushing, when you choose integrity over approval. These moments add up, and slowly, steadily, you begin to feel solid inside, not perfect, not fearless, but grounded. And that groundedness is self-worth taking root. Now let's talk about forgiveness, especially the kind that almost no one wants to address: forgiving yourself. Because for many people, the deepest self-worth wound isn't what others did to you. It's what you believe you should have known, should have stopped, should have been stronger about. You replay old choices, old relationships, old versions of yourself. And instead of seeing survival, you see failure. Instead of seeing learning, you see weakness. That self-judgment becomes a life sentence, and your worth stays trapped in the past. But here's the truth that changes everything. You did the best you could with the awareness, tools, and support you had at the time. That's not an excuse, it's reality. Growth only happens when we have new information. You cannot judge an old version of yourself with the wisdom you have today and call that fairness. Self-forgiveness doesn't mean erasing accountability. It means releasing cruelty. It means saying I can hold myself responsible without hating myself. And that distinction is powerful. When you refuse to forgive yourself, you stay loyal to shame. When you forgive yourself, you reclaim energy that was tied up in punishment and regret. Energy you can now use to heal, to choose differently, to live more fully. Your worth is not determined by your worst moment. It's revealed by your willingness to grow beyond it. And growth requires compassion, not condemnation. The past can inform you. It doesn't get to define you. The moment you loosen its grip, you step closer to the truth of who you are, someone still becoming, still learning, still worthy. Let me leave you with this. Self-worth is not something you find one day and never question again. It's a practice, a daily decision to believe that your humanity is not a flaw, that your feelings are not failures, that your worth is not up for debate. You will still have days when the old voices come back, days when you doubt yourself, days when shame tries to convince you that you are too much or not enough. Those days don't mean you're failing, they mean you're human. The change happens when you stop asking, what do I need to do to be worthy? And start asking, what does a worthy person deserve? Rest, honesty, boundaries, compassion, connection. When you answer that question and live it, you stop chasing worth and start embodying it. You were never meant to prove your value. You were meant to live from it. And the moment you choose to stand in that truth, something inside you settles. You become less reactive, less afraid, more rooted. This is your ending and your beginning. You are allowed to take up space without apology. You are allowed to be imperfect and still be deeply worthy of love and belonging. Nothing you do today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now will add to or subtract from that truth. Your worth is not a destination. It is your starting point.